Good morning, everybody. My name is Rodney Fong, President and CEO of the San Francisco Chamber of Commerce, and we're delighted to have you here today as we get an opportunity to sit down with Gensler Architects. We're in the middle of COVID-19, coming out of the triage, starting to talk about opening, starting to talk about coming back to work, whether that's an office space, a retail space, a restaurant space, a bar space, or an indoor museum. But part of that, and what's intrigued me and why I'm excited about this particular series, is that COVID-19, while a disease and a healthcare issue, coming out of it is so much of a design question, a design challenge, a design solution. And we're starting to see that in forms of plexiglass, of social distancing, cool circles being drawn in parks, how we interact with each other in public spaces is going to be sort of a new social contract with each other. So I'm personally very excited about the design challenges, how that is making very creative people scratch their head. And here in San Francisco in the Chamber of Commerce, we are just surrounded by creative, innovative people who love to solve problems. And I think we're going to start to see some of these problems being solved very quickly, but a lot of people are still sort of, even the great designers are smart enough to pause and scratch their head and figure out what the real problem is before they start solving problems. So today on the subject of going back into the office, we have two great experts, Randy Howder with Gensler and Natalie Engels also with Gensler. Randy is a principal and co-managing partner in the San Francisco office, and Natalie is a principal and design director at the Gensler San Jose office. And I know that they have been very busy scratching their heads and thinking about with their clients and internally how we design ourselves into a new workspace. And so I'll hand it off to them. I want to also just thank all of our sponsors who are part of this. This is part of the San Francisco Build group that is part of the San Francisco Chamber of Commerce and a long-going program. But want to thank Gensler, Hathaway, Dinwiddie, HOK, SOM. The BuildSF group is made of architects, engineers, developers, designers, infrastructure engineers, and folks who are really into the physical aspect of the public realm of San Francisco and improving that. So I'm going to hand it over to Gensler, and Natalie and Randy, take it away.
Wonderful.
Yeah, thanks, Rodney, and thanks everyone for participating today. So Natalie and I we've been thinking a lot about this topic, and I'm going to try to share my screen here. Can you see it, Natalie?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay.
You get a full screen.
Sometimes Zoom will let you go in full screen. There you go. Is that working?
Not yet.
Uh-oh. Yeah, sometimes it doesn't let you do full screen with Zoom. So.
It's there.
Oh, it was there? Well-oiled machine. Right. I'll go back to full screen. So yeah, Natalie and I have been thinking a lot about this topic over the past, more than 100 days. We've all been working from home. Things are starting to get back to normal. I went to my first site visit yesterday, which is exciting for us to be talking about potential new projects. So what we're going to share here are some, kind of return strategies for the future of workplace and office buildings. So we know some of you are focused on really kind of the tenant side of the industry, and some, are owners or landlords or maintain buildings. So we're going to kind of talk about both. And those owners and users alike are really grappling with all of these changes. So, we work with clients all over the world. Our China offices, have been through this and kind of come out the other side. So what we're going to share are some, office space guidelines, some proprietary tools we have, and some services that we've been providing for clients now and in the near term. So we'll focus on some immediate actions, what's happening with the ongoing pandemic, and then at the end, really sort of what our reimagined future is of, what might the office of the future look like once we're past this initial return to the office phase. So we've been listening to our clients a lot. Across the firm, we've had, almost 400 roundtables, one-on-one workshops. We did a global survey of working from home. How is it going? What is the impact on your ability to team with others? And we've engaged with over 67,000 of our clients. So, some of the takeaways here there's a renewed focus on health and wellness. People really understand that virtual it's working okay, but it's not a substitute for real life experiences. And many of our clients are saying, their physical space is really the heart and soul of their organization. And so there's going to be this new normal of everyone working in a hybrid way, some days, spending some days at home and some days in the office. But that almost makes that physical space even more important than in the pre-pandemic days. So we're going to talk about a spectrum of readiness of, some things we need to do right now, which is focusing on health and safety. Through the pandemic, how do we sort of lead through change? And then in the future, as I said, what is that reimagined workplace? So we see, these three incremental shifts along that timeline. So that focus on health. So we'll talk about things, protocols and cleaning. You've probably been bombarded with lots of white papers and methodologies around that. So we'll kind of hopefully dispel some of those things and focus on what's important. Talk about new space typologies. How do base buildings need to adapt? What about infrastructure and systems? And then lastly, what is that really enhanced workplace of the future? How can we use this? I think it was Barack Obama who says a crisis is a terrible thing to waste. How can we not waste this crisis in rethinking the future of our workplaces, our buildings, and our experiences?
Mm-hmm. That's right. So with that, as Randy was saying, when we did the work from home survey, one of the things that we saw is that a majority of employees expect to see a heightened aspect of policies, of cleaning, and of protocols. So as we get into this section, this is really starting to address some of those elements. So as you get into buildings, one of the things that we're finding is a huge priority is really starting to address the screening process and the check-in. How are you going to start doing that in your lobby? Whether it's separated waiting areas for guests versus employees, how is queuing going to happen? Specifically in high rises and elevators, and then on low rise, are you going to have specific entrances for employees for their screening versus guests, so you can make more of a guest experience? And then really looking into how are you going to social distance in the lobby area, and then create touchless experiences, as many of those as you can. Okay. And then the other aspect to that is really about graphics and wayfinding. We're finding that a lot of things out on the market right now are much more risk-oriented or heightened alert. And another aspect of the feedback is that employees really want a sense of ease to come back in. They're nervous enough. And so how can we really create a very welcoming environment with graphics and wayfinding, being very clear on instructions that they need to take as they come in, and then how do they travel? It's going to be different, and they'll get used to it, but specifically that first few weeks, how should they behave? Okay. And then with the elevator and circulation, really starting to look at how are you going to queue? What is the waiting time? How are you getting cleaning to happen within the elevators throughout the day? So making sure that, if you don't already have touchless, how are you going to handle that? We've seen some very inventive methods from our Greater China offices on, how they're starting to handle it in the interim, or if they can't change the system. So really thinking through all of the steps. And then same thing with restrooms, looking into, how are you going to let people know how many people can go in? Is there a waiting system? We've been hearing that, some clients are looking into kind of like on an airplane where you have occupied, not occupied, when there's like if there's three available sinks, three people allowed in, or are you switching over to gender neutral and full height? We've been seeing a good bit of that as well. Okay. And then building systems, the filtration and ventilation. a lot, we've been having so many conversations with our MEP consultants and partners on, what does this really mean? Increased fresh air intake, how are you flushing the mechanical systems? And then starting to look at new technologies with UV, with light, and how, the envelope can really start to, handle these new considerations. Okay. And then with protocols and cleaning, this is the one that keeps coming up each time, really looking to, what are, and sharing this with employees. What is your cleaning protocols? Making sure that cleaning is visible throughout the day. We used to know that it would happen before work and after work, but really increasing the frequency, letting it be seen, and then starting to invest in new types of cleaning methods that maybe we didn't have beforehand, so that we can really make sure that it's getting to a better level.
And then things like, as Natalie was saying, separating, entry and exit, but really thinking through, the guest experience versus the employee experience, and minimizing those points of friction. How are you screening your visitors versus screening employees? Do you, designate a safe zone, where visitors aren't allowed, and sort of, it's all about, in these initial weeks, really creating that sense of safety and kind of comfort. And that extends into the employee spaces themselves. So how you think about circulation and pinch points, avoiding people kind of moving in opposite directions. In the early days of the pandemic, if you went to the grocery store, all the aisles had, one-way directional signage. And then that's kind of started to go away as people have learned how to sort of circulate through the store. The same thing will happen in the workplace. So initially, directional signage, paths, and really reinforcing that protocol to reduce the opportunities for people to kind of accidentally run into each other. We've spent so long creating workplaces that encourage those accidental interactions that, at least in the short term, we've got to kind of retrain ourselves that that's not in our interest initially. And it may be later as the pandemic changes. Other things to avoid elevators and kind of tight spaces is, working with your landlord, as we do in our office in San Francisco, to be able to use the fire stairs. And all buildings have at least 2 fire stairs, so designating one up and one down if you are a multi-floor tenant. And creating potential ways with hold opens, depending on your building, to allow for a touchless experience when using the stairs. And obviously extending your kind of cleaning protocols into spaces like that weren't typically part of the kind of cleaning regimen, or at least the regular cleaning regimen. And then when you get to your desk, we've all seen these diagrams, as Rodney mentioned, of the 6-foot circle. But it's going to really depend on your type of furniture, your individual layout, how close workstations are to circulation. I just reviewed our office this morning, and we're getting about 40% of our normal desks sort of being used in a way that promotes social distancing. So, we actually developed a proprietary tool that allows you to run different scenarios based on different sort of distances and your specific layout and circulation path. So there's ways to, increase partitions temporarily. There's lots of products on the market that I'm sure you're all being talked through with our furniture partners. There may be some, temporary decommissioning of furniture and desks while we enter this initial phase. And then, there's things, we can do in terms of private offices, like having doors remain open to maximize airflow, limiting occupancy, assigning certain spaces to single use if possible, if you do have a desk sharing or office sharing protocol. And then in conference rooms, again, one of the reasons we all want to go back is that in-person collaboration, but we're really going to have to think, at least initially, of limiting the occupancy per room size. Even if people are in the office, still having some number of the team participate in the meeting virtually. and potential things like staggering seating, or at least putting signage on seats if you're not removing them, to at least in those initial phases, to help people realize that they need to kind of keep that social distancing up within rooms. Same thing with collaborative workspaces, limiting seating, workplace food areas, especially in the Bay Area, we have such a provision of food and beverage in our offices. So, obviously moving to things like packaged snacks, again, floor decals that indicate proper circulation, and then really, at least initially, eliminating anything that's shared. So even like the coffee pot, that everybody's touching, people are just going to have to kind of bring their own for a while, or you're going to have to think of more of a single service sort of way of dispensing certain things. And then lastly, outdoor work areas are increasingly popular, even in our kind of foggy climate in the summer here. But again, reconfiguring those things to reinforce social distancing, limiting, things like outdoor sofas and couches and things, and making them more single use or socially distanced. There's going to be an increased demand for these types of spaces because people feel, and it is healthier to be outside. So outdoor meetings and things that you may not have had the tolerance for before may become more of the norm. And then lastly, all of these things are, I would say, in the immediate actions category that we were just sort of talking about. But as we move through this, we're going to have to learn to live with the pandemic. As we're reopening the economy now, we're seeing, some increase in cases. We're probably going to be balancing those things. I don't think most people have a tolerance for going back to the total lockdown, but we may be dealing with changing risk profiles on a weekly basis. And so how you sort of start thinking through that, at least in this phase 2, and then moving into that reimagined future, which is the post-vaccine period, where some of these things we've learned about remote work or hybrid teams become the reality, and our workplaces will shift long-term to accommodate new ways of working, just as they always have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so what we've seen really is that, I think as Randy was saying, that we don't know how much of a tolerance for a complete lockdown people will still have, but what we do know is that most employees want to get back to the workplace. And this was part of our work from home survey that we just did. What we found and what we've been hearing from clients is really close to this number as well. So this is 12% want to stay home 5 days a week. And we've been hearing that it's about 10% to 14%, so right in that range across the board with our Silicon Valley clients. And so what we're seeing, the majority, 70%, want to come in. And so why is that? If you go to the next, we asked, a variety of questions, and it's really about the people. People miss seeing each other. They miss collaborating in person. It's harder at home. And they're also finding that it's really just hard to stay, up to date on what's going on. The other thing that I want to just mention that's not in this deck, but it's just that it's hard for the younger generations to focus at home, whether it's multiple platforms, it's childcare, and also having to teach at the same time. And it's also roommate situations and who gets the Wi-Fi bandwidth at the moment. So people are really wanting to come back. And so when they do, what we need to really focus on is this connected workplace experience. We now have a situation where we are going to be virtual and in person. And so how can we start to leverage different technologies, new technologies? Let this be that catalyst that really gets us there to embrace a better work environment for everyone. Okay. So I'll just keep talking through these. I think there's like a little bit of a lag. So that's okay, that's all right. The next few pages, we're going through a couple of ideas that we've started to look at, and then we'll get into beta concepts in a moment. But, with our immediate coming back, some of the things that we've really begun to look at are things like a gateway, having a place where there is a dashboard, people can quickly find out, you know, who's in the office, who is remote, and then can we connect to each other. There could also be places for supplies, places where you know, you're going to be keeping your immediate information, and then looking at how these could become Pirtle porches, where you have places where you can work, you can focus if you need to really close off of that. It's starting to create a new kit of parts within a neighborhood. How can teams begin to work out in the open? Because most of the work here is going to be meeting and collaborative. And then when you get into meeting rooms, really looking at how that experience can be a mixed reality. We're going to need to start looking into digital whiteboards so that people at home can have that same feel and participation. The virtual team member is going to be just as important as the team member in the room. And so we need to keep this equity that we've created while we've been working from home. Okay. And then we're also starting to look at how our neighborhoods tech enabled. Are there different techniques that we could start to look at? Powered focus nooks. Really, how can you start to, you know, share a desk with your remote peers? So even though you're not in person next to each other, you can be working side by side, almost that paired working, but virtual and in real time. And then letting there be impromptu sessions with remote teams. This is all going to be part of that casual collision that we used to do in the office that we're going to need to have as created virtually. And then a connected kitchen. Are there ways that we can start to, you know, get content feeding into, you know, the break areas where our social interaction always happened, to really create this great conversation starters, looking at having, you know, portal coffee meetings, but really just taking it a step further to see how we can, you know, create these two versions, reality and in person, as a better experience and not a have and a have not. Okay.
Yeah, so we see, you know, a workplace right now that we may have designed here in San Francisco, which is really about 100% assigned seating. You know, it's sort of a very dense environment, kind of one size fits all, you know, with a kind of complement of lots of different size conference rooms. So how do we start to evolve this into a future that as Natalie was describing, really blends that at-home employee or the remote employee with the person that's in the office, right? And how do we make that experience seamless? So we have sort of three scenarios that we are going to kind of quickly walk you through. One is a remote hub, which is really the future of increasingly remote employees, whether they're here in the Bay Area or somewhere far away. Lots of companies have been managing teams across distributed geographies, but what if the workplace really becomes an intentional destination for remote employees? So that's like things like onboarding or quarterly training or other types of you know, project-based interactions where it really is beneficial to be together and come together for key moments in the life of a team, and then everybody goes back to their kind of remote location. So we'll walk you through what that might look like. This idea of a flex studio, which is really, you know, the notion that distributed work settings happen across neighborhoods that each have their own identity. So it's sort of like a homeland for a team, but everyone, you know, is, as we said earlier from the survey, is working from home, you know, up to 2 or 3 days a week. And so, but some people actually prefer to be in the office. And so we're gonna have to deal with that sort of both and scenario with teams, and how does a neighborhood evolve to not be a one size fits all. And then lastly, what we're calling the digital update. If you're like us, we just celebrated the 2nd anniversary in our existing space, which in San Francisco means we paid a pretty penny to not only lease, but to fit that space out. That's an investment that we can't just sort of write off. We need to work with the existing architecture and space that we've recently built. But how can we supplement that experience with furniture and technology upgrades, which maybe aren't as capital intensive, to bridge the gap between those people that are at home and those who prefer to work in the office? So It's about embedding digital touch points into existing spaces. So Natalie and I will quickly walk you through these, and then we'll wrap up and hopefully have time for questions. So the remote hub is the idea that the workplace is no longer for working. So maybe less heads down work is happening there, but it's more about, as I said, a destination for deliberate activities. So it's that quarterly sales training, it's onboarding, it's a team who's about to release a big product, right? And they come together for a few weeks. It's reconfigurable team space, and within that has layers of privacy. So this would be a typical floor, and you see these different size neighborhoods. You also see on the left side some, shared amenity space and kind of core conference rooms and meeting spaces. But if we look at the idea of this workplace neighborhood as almost like a marketplace, you start to see how different teams will reconfigure the space to suit their needs. So it's akin to the workplace almost becoming like a hotel conference center, where you might come for a conference for a few days, and then the next week it's a totally different type of conference. And the facility is managed to sort of turn the furniture and change the settings and obviously clean and maintain the space, but it really shifts from one function to the next pretty seamlessly, with a few pieces of movable architecture and lots of movable furniture, and more importantly, this kind of service overlay. So you see here with what we're calling the remote hub marketplace, this might be a team who's there because they're jamming on a project or a big deliverable, and they're all convening for a few weeks to work on that. And again, there's multiple work points within that, but this is more of a team that's focused on heads down work and kind of getting something out the door, versus a hybrid team where you may be there for a slightly longer period of time and there's different functions happening. So there's sort of furnitecture, as we call it, which creates different sort of moments within a larger open space to buffer different collaborative zones. There's this sort of co-op, as we're calling it, which is kind of architecture that expands and adapts as the team needs it to. And then, different types of work settings, operable partitions that open and close and create different types of meeting facilities. And then lastly, this one that's much more focused on collaboration. So this might be that sales team that primarily works remotely, but they're coming back for kind of a quarterly meeting for a given period of time. So it's much more about community and connection than about heads down work. But all of these functions can happen in the same space. So you're sort of building it once, and then it will modify, adapt, and change depending on the user group that has sort of become resident for a temporary period of time.
You can even see the neighborhoods shifting into that as well. You could have neighborhoods set up, or what was neighborhoods that are now these different meeting points. So next, getting into the idea of a flex studio. This is a fresh take on a neighborhood setup. So something that, language that we've been very familiar with, specifically in the tech sector, and starting to, really let these neighborhood zones that you see kind of protected, the lighter gray protected by the darker gray, become these semi-private flex zones, or that's the boundary around them, with 30-person collectives. In this scenario, it lets us start to look at how life would be if we needed our neighborhoods and our work environment to be responsive to risks. So here you see, you can get off of the floor, you see the blue line that is traveling around, and you'll notice these arrows going into these flex studios. And at entrance points that have doors, and we'll show you some 3D images that help explain it a bit. And then you'll see that kind of swing door with the dashed arc. That really is allowing for studios to join, so it can be open together, and then it has the ability to close down. Okay. So as we, are thinking about, what is it like in a low risk time, as you come off of the elevator and you have reception, this could definitely be an in-person. It can, change over to a virtual experience. And the other thing that we've been, seeing really resonate, and we've been talking a lot about, is this concept of a mudroom, and having a place where you can enter in. You can put your commuted belongings into a locker. You can take out your work belongings. It's going to have your whiteboard markers, your own water container, your own coffee mug, and let that stay at work, so you're not transferring things back and forth. It also allows for your guests to do the same thing. If you need them to drop their bag or personal belongings, they can do that. And then you'll notice that in elevated risk time, what has happened here, specifically on the background, is that that had a break room with 2 meeting rooms, and it's now changed into one larger room in case the food service out in the neighborhood or on the bottom floor or amenity floor is restricted, and you need to open that up so that employees could eat together there. Okay. And then in the neighborhood, when we start to look at a low risk moment, this is where you can flow between the neighborhoods. So you're going to see that we have about 28 to 32 people within a neighborhood. And we have the meeting rooms adjacent to them, what is needed. You'll also notice that off of that hallway, you can get to some of these meeting spaces so that people are only coming into the neighborhood if they need to come into the neighborhood. But you are allowing for pathways across. And there's opportunities here. You'll see some of these touchless digital collaboration zones that we've added in, because it's really important to figure out how you're going to work with your remote employees. And then in the elevated risk moments, you'll see that sliding panels could close, the doors could become card reader, so that just the neighborhood attendees would come into that neighborhood. Okay. The next one you'll see is a stacked version, just showing the overall. So as we've been diving into these, we've been really looking at the metrics, because that's what's on everyone's mind. How many people are we going to be able to have in our space moving forward, and what is the square foot per person going to be, and how different is it going to be from where we were to day one to the future. Okay. So the next one is really about the digital update. And this one is an overlay of your existing space. So not so much that you'll see a huge change in how we're handling the architecture in this space, but it's more additive in this version. So as we start to look at the plan, is really getting into, okay, so what is community? What can be co-working and you can allow visitor in, versus what is meeting and what is more protected neighborhoods. Okay. So as you come into reception and the amenity zone, one of the things that we've been starting to think about, and this is our Gensler office, by the way, so we're using it as an example in San Francisco. So on the elevators, is there something that we can start to look at where there's an app-based like call functionality, so you don't have to press a button? Is there thermal screening within the elevator lobbies? Starting to look at that co-working area, and is concierge more of an AI experience? And then looking into our kitchen area, what is going to be touchless? How will lunch happen, or a virtual lunch with in-person and not in-person? And then in our meeting rooms, really starting to look into how are sensors taking place? Are there multiple cameras? Tilting the screen for flexibility, really starting to look at what is the in-person versus virtual experience. So again, getting into a lot of those ideas of this equity experience. And then looking into our work zones, how are we moving forward with the open office, really, letting it be personalized but adaptive? How are we using, the sensors to get real-time data about how people are utilizing space? This has been a huge conversation across the board with clients, actually globally. And getting into this experience solution, I think we've all been having so many conversations about what is this conference experience going to be. So I know you saw some of those in our previous thoughts, but really dialing that in is going to be key for a great experience, specifically for the people who are at home and experience the people who are in the office. And so again, looking at how we're starting to use the stairwells, really utilizing the workspace to make it just an optimal experience, even though it is less dense and there are less of your teammates in person. And then getting those metrics right. How can we start to really dial that in so that it's a good experience, but it's not over the top in our expenses.
Yeah. So lastly, I think it's really just about the thinking through the especially in the Bay Area with our preponderance of tech clients. It's really about thinking through how do you equalize that experience that happens on a tech campus with those who are working remotely or at home. There's things like food and beverage, lifestyle and convenience, health and wellness, community interactions, sort of analog research lab sort of functionalities, which is like, kind of maker spaces and artists and resident spaces. How do those sort of experiences become accessible? So we've been talking with a lot of our clients about that. And I think that's the next wave once we sort of get our heads around how we get back into the office. It's how do we start to extend that cultural life of our company beyond the walls of our space, which is going to be the reality no matter what, even with a vaccine or a return to normalcy. I think people have gotten used to and find productive some portion of their activities being conducted outside of the office. And so that's what we're going to be living with. And so I think that's the bright future of sort of what Natalie and I do for a living, is that we get to help our clients think through this really, what we think is going to be a great future of sort of optimizing the experience between the workplace and alternate locations, which are just really expands the thinking that our clients are doing and the impact that they can have on their communities and their cities. So with that, we wanted to thank you for participating, and definitely we're here to answer questions.
Excellent.
Back over to Rodney.
Well, thank you, Natalie, Randy. Fascinating discussion, and I think it's interesting how you've looked at our domestic life, including a mudroom, including communal spaces, and sort of what is the back of the house, the bedrooms that is reserved for the family. A lot of those, things are sort of natural in human interaction, and makes complete sense. I like the marketplace concept. I like the mudroom piece, and sort of the clean room, almost like lockers that are at the forefront of the space rather than deep into the space in the employee break room concept. Again, this is a design challenge, all fascinating to me, expensive and troubling to some degree to a lot of folks, but I think the clean is the new green, and it will differentiate the successful businesses from the not so successful businesses or companies as far as attracting employees to come to work for them. I know there were a couple of questions here, and one from Cliff Waldeck, who's his family's been in the business product and supply industry. Well, I think business products, and I think his question is, how do vendors potentially, and the second question about from a catering company, how do vendors maybe become qualified or certified to serve and come into a campus setting, to come into an office space? I would guess as a procurer for an office that I'd want to think twice about or make sure that my vendor suppliers who are coming in to make deliveries are following the same level of standards of practice, and that their shops are equally on a 5-star program, a 4.5. Any thought to that?
With our, we started talking about this with our China offices in Shanghai. One of the things that they, as they were showing us what they're experiencing, the employees that are delivering food, so specifically just to talk about that one, they're going through a certain amount of regulation, and then their outfits they have a specific outfit that they wear. So then they have been vetted They are not sick. They've handled the food properly, and they're delivering it properly. So while some of the regulations that happen in China can't happen here, it would be very interesting if there is a new type of checklist or regulation or something that, kind of like we do with the health department, right? And cleaning and making sure that it passes the inspections. Can these companies pass inspection, basically, so that you're getting the same quality of cleaning and of health as you are from one to another.
Yeah, it'll be very interesting. What is the LEED certification of clean going forward? Well, I want to thank both of you. This, I think, is just the beginning of many, many conversations as we evolve and challenge ourselves and grow. Want to thank Gensler again, in particular Scott Dunlap, Principal Managing Partner Gensler, for being very helpful in putting this together. Our other sponsors, Hathaway Dinwiddie, HOK, and SOM, all the top tier folks in the city, and collectively and individually solving some of these problems. So I want to again thank you for joining us. Thank you for that presentation. The presentation is going to be made available, and this webinar will be recorded forever. So thanks very much, and we will see you soon. Thank you.
Thanks,
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.